Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you're in great company. We've got thousands of listeners who have a thirst for continual improvement and raising standards in business. Whether your interest is in quality, sustainability, or risk standards, I'd love to welcome you as a member to our online platform for all things ISO, the ISology Hub. The ISology Hub is the leading place to get access to all of your online resources, from in-depth training courses through to our very popular coffee break training, to templates and action plans and many other resources to help raise standards. As a member, you get access to over 100 courses, taking you from learner to practitioner to leader. The ISology Hub has all the resources that you need, which will really help to make your life easier and to help improve compliance in those business critical areas. So if you'd like access to learning and compliance resources ranging from data privacy to environmental management, anti-bribery, business continuity, quality, health and safety, to name just but a few, the list is endless actually, then we'd love for you to come and join us. Just head over to the isologyhub.com.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the ISO Show. Today we're going to be talking about procurement, not something I'm a great expert in, but fortunately today we have Philip Ideson, who is the founder and managing director of an organisation called Art of Procurement. The theme today is their mission to 10 times the impact of procurement. So firstly, welcome, Philip. Good to have you here today.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's a pleasure to be here.
And as I said, this is not a subject I'm particularly familiar with. I work in standards, ISO 9001 in particular, and 1445 and that sort of thing. And they do have elements within them. 9001's got a clause around the control of externally provided resources. So I'm familiar with the sort of verification and monitoring of supply chain to an extent. But clearly you'll have an awful lot more insight into that. Could you just give our listeners a brief intro about your own background, the company's background, your career and your current role?
Yeah, absolutely. And for better or worse, I've been in the procurement space for almost 25 years now, which is scary every time you look back and think about what that number is.
Yeah.
And procurement is really, helping organizations buy the products, the services that they need to operate. And that can be, I started in Ford Motor Company, so buying stuff that goes in cars in the UK. And then, so that's kind of direct procurement. And then I moved over to Water, which is called indirect procurement, which is essentially all the stuff that you need to operate on a day-to-day basis, but doesn't necessarily go into the product. So childcare facilities, marketing, office products, you name it. And so, I've had a career that spanned, went from, buying the widgets, buying light bulbs for cars, up to being a head of procurement across a variety of different industries. Was lucky to work both in the UK, through Europe. I lived and worked in India for a year, and then been in the US now for the last 19 years. And, got to be a head of procurement and decided I would try and see what life was like on the other side of the table. So joined a service provider who was providing outsourced services for procurement. Did that for a few years. We got bought by Accenture. And so I decided to go out on my own and set up Art of Procurement. So Art of Procurement started about 9 years ago, really as a podcast, and it was, how can I help inspire, share stories of companies who are thinking differently about procurement. Procurement has a really bad rep in a lot of places, and oftentimes that's deserved, as being the, let's go up and beat up our suppliers for the last percentage of profit margin that they may have. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. And I wanted to help kind of inspire procurement folks to think differently about what they could do and the value that they could have. So that was kind of the driving force. And from there, we've turned into...
More collaborative.
Yeah, exactly. Being a lot more collaborative. And so the business then has grown into a media company around procurement, and then also just advisory services, helping folks build more impactful procurement teams.
Okay. And you've had 19 years in the States and still managed to protect your accent to a great degree.
I try my best. It's not quite... It probably helps that I just spent the last week back home in Yorkshire, so I've probably still got a little bit of that, But
good man, good man. That's where I am right now. Actually, I'm in Leeds, so a good place to be.
Yeah, I'm from Skipton, so that's where I spent the last week.
And I have noticed that you also share a love of football and championship teams, or a championship team, and you do a podcast on that. Which is your team then?
So my team is actually, unfortunately, League Two at the moment. So it's Bradford City.
Oh,
That's my local team.
oh, right,
But
right.
I do a podcast with the owner and chairman of Peterborough United. So a chap called Darren McAnthony. And, we were awarded the EFL Podcast of the Year last year. And it's something we try and do every week to kind of go behind the scenes. Like, what's it like as the roller coaster from an owner perspective of the football season and everything that goes on behind the scenes. So, yeah, that's my passion, I guess, outside of procurement.
Well, enough of the fun stuff.
Yes.
Enough of the fun stuff. Back to the dry matters of procurement and the like. As we said, we're going to talk about procurement today. What, in your opinion, are some of the top trends and priorities in procurement right now? What's important to you?
I think that procurement right now, as many functional areas, are having to struggle or contend with digitization of the function. As technology has moved very rapidly, procurement has always been a function where change happens slowly from a technological perspective. And perhaps until 5 years ago, there wasn't that many options of tech solutions that were built specifically for procurement. And the last 5 years has seen just a huge explosion as a lot of money came into the space. And so there's this challenge of, how do I digitize? I now have so many options, I don't know what to do about it and which to choose. And I'm afraid of, bringing in new technology solutions for them to be obsolete in a year's time. Of course, everyone's struggling with AI and figuring out what impact that's going to be. So that's a really big focus area for procurement right now.
Is there anything about procurement that's surprising, though? Anything that people who don't work in your field would say, oh, I never realized that?
I think, when it comes to us as individuals, we don't just care about beating up suppliers and, saving up every single penny in cost. I think we're a lot more passionate around the role that suppliers can play in the growth of an organization, and how we can kind of marry together the capabilities of supply chains with, the needs of a business, as opposed to it being, well, procurement's just coming in and beating suppliers up, because I think that was the old world procurement, if you will, rather than what modern day procurement is.
I think that's an image many of us probably still share. We do hear the stories of all forms of supply chains and things like in the grocery sector, supermarket sector. That still sounds like a trend that's prevalent.
Yeah, I think it's organization to organization. Like, I think as a function we are maturing, but oftentimes, it's driven by what does the organization require of us. I think one of the challenges that we have in procurement is, in a lot of businesses, we kind of professionalized the profession based on an ROI, which was tied to cost savings. And so now, this investment happened in procurement and getting more people and getting more technology, all predicated on, well, you're going to save more money, right? And for a lot of leaders within organizations, non-procurement leaders, because we sold that value proposition to get the investment, it means that That's the only thing they think that we can do. So that's the box. Procurement gets put in this box within a business of when I need to save money, break the glass, bring out procurement, and they can do that. Where procurement's been successful in demonstrating that we can operate in a far more collaborative approach that's a lot more tied to business objectives rather than procurement objectives, actually the savings still follow, but you're not focusing on the savings. And so there are organizations now that are kind of seeing that and realizing it and being a bit more, you don't quite have everybody as being as old school as they used to be.
Yeah. We've got a couple of key themes we want to touch on today, and one of them is the role of ESG in procurement, environment, social governance reporting. And what you're talking about, that evolution in procurement and people's view of it, does sort of lend itself to that. It's a high visibility initiative for many companies now. So where do you see procurement's role with regard to ESG reporting?
So, when you talk about priorities in procurement, ESG is definitely one of the high priorities that procurement leaders have right now. And interestingly, I was involved in a research study that was done by The Economist, an Economist Impact, in partnership actually with SAP. And they surveyed like 2,300 C-suite execs, procurement and non-procurement folks. And I think ESG came out as the number two priority for procurement right now, but very specifically tied to sustainability, the E, and not as much the S and the G. That's being kind of where a big focus is. I would say from the S perspective, supplier diversity has probably taken a bit of a hit in terms of prioritization over the last 12 months or so, I would say. Although, of course, some of those trends are very geographic.
Yeah, imagine, yeah.
Kind of the modern slavery, I think, is something that's becoming more at the forefront, though, for procurement folks and thinking about that in supply chains when it comes to the S. So supply diversity, a little less important than it was 12 months ago. Modern slavery getting to be more important for procurement folks.
Do you see that changing at all then? You say that certain elements fall into the background. Do you believe that that's a temporary situation, or do you believe that it will evolve more so in the future?
I think it's temporary. I think that sometimes these initiatives are led by the politics of the day and, by different countries and, their investment in those. At the end of the day, I don't think that tying, your ESG reporting, for example, which is more and more being tied to, for a CFO, their ability to raise money at favorable rates because of credit ratings that are impacted by ESG scores. Like, as that continues, there's no choice for organizations to focus more on ESG and then, of course, specifically for that to roll down to procurement because, when you think about emissions, for example, scope 3 emissions, most of the emissions for an organization are going to be with their supply chain.
Yeah, the impact of your supply chain cannot be undersold, really, can it, when it comes to ESG? It's clear that everybody, regardless of type of organization, is reliant on people downstream from them. And that being said, how long has the procurement organization as a whole been involved in ESG initiatives and reporting and other corporate social responsibility side of things?
Yeah, I kind of smile in a way to answer that question because I think that, I think back to my time as a practitioner and probably 13, 14 years ago, I was in a role where I had to report supply diversity spend. So it's been a part, but, when I smile and say it's supply diversity spend, we had no data really. So you're kind of just trying to search for suppliers who you think might be diverse suppliers and, do a lot of, trying to, it's not making up numbers, it's extrapolating data so that you have something. So that's 14 years ago. So we've been doing it, but have we been doing it with the seriousness and the accuracy that it requires? No. I think that that's probably the last 5 or 6 years. And then that's very organization by organization based because at the end of the day, what that drives procurement involvement in sustainability, ESG, whether it's CSR, sustainability, supply diversity, all those things, is really regulatory requirements.
that measuring, the data hasn't been available for that long, you were saying. Clearly, you're reliant on others to provide that data, the source of that data. You were talking about technological advancements earlier on as well, digitizing. Have the changes in the last few years around that digitizing lent themselves to having that data? Is it better and easier because of that, or rather to just happy coincidence?
No, it's better because of that, and the uptake is increasing for technology that now will enable and support ESG reporting. So that probably just didn't really exist a few years ago, and now that's been both added to the tech stacks of existing kind of data and analytics firms within the procurement space that support procurement, but also new players in the market who very specifically specialize on ESG reporting and ESG data. So that is definitely helping. When I think about how I did it before, it was you get a spreadsheet of all your spend with all your different suppliers, and you're going down that and taking, okay, so I've got 10,000 suppliers. Let me take 100 at random, and then let me go and Google them to find out which ones I think are diverse suppliers, and figure out what my spend is and extrapolate that. So it's a very different world now for most than it is, 15 years ago.
That is a bit of a finger in the air, isn't it? We've touched on the difficulty in measuring and the data available for that. What other great challenges do you think that the procurement world faces with respect to ESG at the moment and into the future?
I think that when I put my procurement hat on, so one of the challenges is internal. So, as an organization, how much value or focus is placed on ESG? Because ultimately, procurement can care, but when decisions are being made around which suppliers to use, and there's which supply chains to route things through, and we're thinking about emissions and we're thinking about risk, and that drives additional cost, then ultimately it's the budget holder who's going to decide whether they're willing to bear that additional cost or not. Now, as procurement, we can do everything we can to mitigate that additional cost, let's say, but procurement doesn't decide who spends money with who. And so it does depend on the organizational focus on those initiatives somewhat for us to be able to make a difference.
Yeah. So you're talking as if procurement's role in the business world and in the strategic direction of businesses has improved. Do you still see a lot of scope for its position at the table to be better?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that procurement has been on a journey the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, professionalizing the function. And as I said before, that was done predominantly from a cost base. So you kind of landed as a cost management function. And so ever since then, it's now been, okay, how can we demonstrate additional value that we can bring to the organization that goes beyond cost, of which sustainability and a broader ESG, supply diversity, is a very important one. And some organizations have been more successful in doing that than others, for sure. But that's kind of the path of travel. I think about procurement now is moving. When you look at the priorities that procurement leaders have right now and kind of the key areas of focus, they all fit under a risk banner. Before you may say it was a cost function. Now it's really moving to be a risk management function, of which cost is one risk factor, but it's only one risk factor. And there's many others around, supply chain risk, around sustainability and environmental risk, and all those are kind of coming under the pie of what procurement looks at today, as opposed to just go out and save me some money.
And you've talked of it as a journey. Where's that journey going to take you? How's that going to pan out for the future? Where will procurement be in a few years' time with respect to its place and particularly with respect to ESG?
I think like most areas of a business, there's a lot of uncertainty about what the next 10 years or so brings. I see for procurement being a much smaller function, maybe not much smaller, but a smaller functional area that it is today, that's assisted by technology, but likely more impactful. And so, you'll have changes to a procurement operating model, which mean you have more of a kind of service-based approach to how we support the business, as opposed to here's a policy and a process, and you have to go and buy everything through procurement. There's going to be a lot more of a nuanced kind of approach to how we support the business. I can see a world where sustainability and supply chain kind of merges a little bit because of how much impact third-party suppliers have on an organization's ability to meet its commitments and its goals around sustainability.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah,
That can't be siloed. And, oftentimes it's siloed right now. And procurement's kind of fighting to say, hey, we can play a big role in that. Organizations that probably do the best are really connected when it comes to sustainability and supply chain. So I can see that getting closer.
well, yeah, that silo approach could be really the topic for many a discussion on various other matters, couldn't it? Yeah. The other key thing we were going to touch on was your mission, the mission of Art of Procurement to 10 times the impact of procurement. What is that mission then? What do you aim to do?
Really, when we talk about 10xing the impact of procurement, is as much of a mindset change than we want to try and help procurement leaders think outside the box. Procurement's defined in this very specific way around our policies and procedures and what we've done in the past and that whole cost kind of focus. And when you think about the impact that procurement can have on an organization in terms of organizational strategy, some of the things we've talked about from an ESG perspective, because we get that connection point between huge, big capabilities of an outside world of all the different potential suppliers you can use and the business itself, there's so much more kind of impactful role that we can play. But doing that doesn't mean, okay, how do I become 5% better at writing an RFP document? Or how do I, create a slightly better relationship with my supplier? It just really requires us to go back to the drawing board and rethink, what is procurement? What should we do? How should we operate? How can we best support our business? And, what areas of development should we be focusing on from our teams, from a skill base, from a technology that we leverage, and really just putting it all on the table. And that's not to say that every organization is going to look the same, because it's not going to look the same. It's going to be, very specific to each business. But kind of deconstructing those boundaries, those kind of false boundaries that we put around ourselves, I think is the first step. So that's why we talk about 10x. Like, let's just get out of that, that box to rethink what we can do.
A rethinking rather than a refining of how you currently do it. It's go back to basics almost. And can you tell me something of are there 6 principles, are there, of this thinking?
We did. We put together really just to start debate, as much as saying, we know what you should be focusing on. But some of the things that, we want procurement leaders to think about, if they are doing this within their teams and if they have the capabilities to be able to do this. And so as an example, at the top really, although these are, they're not in kind of order of importance, they're all of equal importance, but we really believe the focus on driving business outcomes is, that has to be at the core of everything that a procurement organization does. Not that we exist for the sake of what procurement's goals are, but how do we actually build our capabilities around what the business truly needs from a procurement organization? Because there's so much conflict that can sometimes exist within an organization between procurement stakeholders, between our suppliers, when we are going out and just trying to justify our existence by saving as much money as possible. So it's taking a much bigger perspective on why do we exist. I won't go through all of them, but another one I think is important that we're really helping to try and crystallize is this idea that we had of procurement facilitating differentiated decision making. So when I talk about differentiated decision making, what I mean is, like, what's your purpose? What's the purpose of a procurement organization? If a business stakeholder can make decisions related to their suppliers and can make decisions related to which suppliers to pick and, how to reduce, emissions through a certain supply chain or whatever it may be, because these people who are stakeholders are people who have an awful lot of experience in doing the things that they're doing, and working with the suppliers that they're working with. If we can't show up with information, data, insights, perspectives, which actually change the decisions that they would ordinarily make on their own, for good reason, that drives better outcomes, then what's the point of us existing? We become a very tactical and transactional organization who's there to check some boxes, to make the auditors happy, and just to make sure the suppliers get paid.
Well, and the language you're using, it tickles me because you are literally talking in the same manner that standards like ISO 9001 are now written in. 9 years or so ago, they were rewritten because it was pretty much acknowledged that you could write a quality management system to get through a certification exercise and get the badge, while it had no impact on the organisation. And now we have clauses in the standards and a structure to them around context of the organisation, strategic direction, interested parties, risk and opportunity. So the whole point now is that any management system should contribute to the strategic direction and the objectives of the organisation. And what you're describing is literally a management system style of approach. So it's good to hear.
Yes. And I'll just pick one more because some of them are getting in the weeds of procurement a little bit. So procurement is often, when procurement looks at baselines and then benchmarks themselves around what success looks like. One of the things they benchmark themselves around is this idea of spend under management. What spend under management means is how much as a procurement organization are you managing of the spend that your company spends with outside suppliers? And just that terminology of management suggests that we're trying to take control over people's budgets. And it's like a land grab. We're going to get as much as we can as a land grab, so we can go and say, well, we're managing 90% of the spend of the business. Where we're trying to push people to kind of change that thinking is, rather than managing that spend, is overseeing spend. So overseeing 100% of external spending is one of the pillars of our 10x procurement. And what we're trying to say there is procurement should have not necessarily the controls, but using technology, the ability to understand what is being spent with who, where. And, the ability to put certain guardrails that the organization feel is important from a governance perspective, from a risk management perspective, whatever it may be. But the role of procurement isn't to just try and manage everything. We should be looking at, on a case-by-case basis, where does it make sense for us to get involved more deeply versus get out of the way? Because, I really believe that most people who interact with procurement do so because they're buying something simple. 95% of the organization, the only experience they have with procurement is, I need to go and buy a box of pens, or I need to go and, buy this subscription, or I need to go and do that. And we make it really hard for them. And so because we make it really hard for them, they all come away and think that was a really bad experience and I don't have a very good procurement. And then that, compounds to then, well, if procurement can't let me go and buy this subscription, this magazine subscription, or, whatever it is I need, then how are they going to help me with my more strategic purchases? They can't. And so the easier we make things at the lower end for people to buy, the more we get out of their way, then the more likely people are going to trust us to actually help them when it comes to the big strategic initiatives.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's a fair point, actually, that, isn't it? So do you think you are philosophically different to other tenets of procurement then?
I just think that I said a journey before. I just think it's a journey where organizations are at different parts on the maturity curve. And I think one of the challenges we have in procurement is you have leaders who are definitely on this path and are doing really interesting things. And then there's a huge gap, and so there isn't necessarily yet a lot of followers. The followers are kind of slow followers, if you will. And so part of what we want to try and do is help accelerate, the speed of maturity change of the followers so that we all kind of go along that path. Because for me, it's kind of an existential thing for procurement is if we don't do that, then the new technology providers who are coming up with really interesting ways to do things that procurement does using bots and automation and things like that, if they can't sell that technology to procurement, they'll end up selling that technology to the CFO, and they'll say to the CFO, all those procurement people who you don't think really do much and you think they're just tactical, haven't I got the piece of AI for you?
Right, yeah.
And then that takes the decision out of procurement's hands because the C-suite don't have a good perception of what procurement does, and so thinks that what we do is very transactional and can be replaced by technology.
You don't need a Philip, you need a bot.
Exactly, because what do? They make our lives difficult and they just press a few buttons.
It's interesting that notion that you've sort of captured a view of procurement as being an obstacle to effective management. That's quite an interesting view. But thinking about it, it sort of makes sense, yeah. It's almost an ideological battle now, isn't it, between many functions that we know and have existed throughout business. An AI world, a technological world, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's funny. We think in our procurement bubble that we're the only ones that have this existential crisis, but then you look outside of procurement and you see, finance people are talking about this, and HR people are talking about this, and marketing people are talking about this. So I don't think it's unique to procurement.
No, it's not. But when it comes to AI, musicians and artists and the like are talking about it as well. So it's a bit of an interesting world in which we live. So, is there anything to wrap up? Anything you'd like to say to the listeners? Tell them about your journey and what you want to see change. Sort of an important, final words at all.
I think understanding that the likely listener to this is not a procurement person, but probably somebody who has to work with procurement at certain times is, I think that procurement folks have a desire to be probably more collaborative than if you come across procurement folks who are non-collaborative, I don't think that's from a place of not wanting to be. It's probably they're overwhelmed, or they're stressed, or they're under a lot of pressure to do something else. So I would just encourage you to try and find ways that you can connect over like common goals of what you're trying to achieve, and help procurement be an advocate of what it is that you're trying to achieve, because we love being advocates. At the end of the day, I think the procurement psyche for a lot of people is everyone hates us, and why is everyone doing these things, because we're not, oftentimes we struggle with influence. And so kind of playing into that and realizing that there's probably more that brings us together than sets us apart, as a place for collaboration, is a direction of to explore, and not just look at us as being the big bad person who wants to beat everybody up.
Well, try be a quality manager or an internal auditor.
Yeah.
And you're right. Probably many of our audience will be people interested in management systems, that side of things. But the language you're using, the way you're talking about facilitating effective business management, is exactly what they're looking for. We have to, in our roles, in our professions, we have to deliver through others. We have to facilitate effective management through others, and create management systems that allow that to happen. And for many organisations, procurement is very much part of that. And in this journey of ESG, procurement's not going away. It's a central part of this world we live in now, isn't it?
And I would say, I see in a lot of organizations where, procurement, when you talk about internal audit, procurement may fear internal audit a little bit in terms of, am I doing the right process? Am I doing this in line? Because there's so much nuance. It's very hard to write a process for all circumstances. So there's that little bit of fear. But I've also seen where a lot of change is driven that enables procurement and enables procurement success actually comes from internal audit findings. And so I think there's a lot of, I think of examples where I've struggled to do things, or my clients have struggled to do things in terms of put procurement more on the map in their organization, that has then been enabled by internal audit findings, which provide a case for investment in procurement. And then that's what procurement needs to kind of, that prioritizes, okay, now I really need to think about procurement and what procurement can do for me. And that's been a good launch pad for procurement many times in actually building the capabilities they want to support the business.
It's good to hear somebody talk from the other side of internal audit on one of the benefits that I always use to sell the idea to people. Internal audit is a powerful tool. It empowers people, business units, organisations to make the right decisions based on independent finding, and that's the way to use it.
Yeah, and it can make senior leaders aware of things they were not aware of before. And so, I think of an example where somebody was trying to get investment to invest in procurement, and pretty unsuccessfully. Internal audit findings go to the CEO, and the CEO is immediately saying, well, why are we not investing there? Because it seems like a no-brainer from a business process perspective, but also from a business health perspective. And that immediately brought attention to an issue that was never on the radar of an executive who can make investment decisions.
And I think having somehow managed to weave my way from procurement back to one of my favourite topics, internal audit, you've done a fabulous job in selling both ideas. If people want to know more about you, Philip, and the art of procurement, where can they find you?
Yep, so it's simple. Our website is artofprocurement.com. If you want to listen to kind of the inside track on how procurement thinks, we're interviewing on our podcast every week. It's the largest podcast in the procurement space, and you can just search for Art of Procurement wherever you get your podcasts. And I'm happy for anybody to reach out via LinkedIn.
And if anybody's more interested in football, what's the name of your football podcast?
It's called The Hard Truth Inside the Football Industry Podcast.
Right, I'm tuning in tonight.
You may need to make sure that there's no children in the vicinity, because my chairman co-host, is not shy.
Okay, football language. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Philip. Fascinating. Great to hear from you today. Maybe one time in the future we'll catch up again. So thanks again for joining us.
Yep, my pleasure.
Thanks to all our listeners as well today. Before I go, can I just remind everybody, please subscribe on your preferred media player if you've not already done so. And if you've got a few minutes to spare, could you give us a review? 5 stars would be excellent. It helps us to reach out to more people, a wider audience as well. Having people like Philip on hopefully does as well with broadening the scope of what we talk about away from just management systems and ISO and audit and the like. We're part of a wider world, and these sorts of conversations help us to reach different people, hopefully. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions for future topics, please get in touch. Send us an email directly to Blackmores or comments on your media player. We'd love to hear from you all. That's all from me and from Philip today. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch up with you on the next ISO show. Goodbye.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.